Mikhailo Podolyak is the press advisor of President Zelensky, and he announced that the war in Ukraine would inevitably escalate and that it would take in some aspect of Russian conflict. He was very clear, actually, about what that it would involve. He said it wasn't Ukraine's intention to invade Russia or to launch an attack directly in Russia, but he thought that the Russian population would rise up in some form and that the coddled cities of Moscow, St. Petersburg and so on would find themselves caught up in some sort of escalated conflict with their own citizens. Now, one has to be very careful what one says, because inevitably things are going to get twisted, and it's not the Russian narrative to suggest that civilians in Russia will rise up against their president and against their government. Dmitry Peskov responded to Mikhailo Podolyak's statement by saying that this confirms the correctness of Moscow's decision to invade Ukraine because Kyiv is threatening the stability of life in Russia and is threatening Russia with an invasion. Simply not what Podolyak was saying. And to drive home this idea, the mayor of the area closest to Russia, a man called Vyacheslav Gladkov, claims that 25 residents in Belgorod have been killed and 96 more have been injured as a result of Ukrainian shelling since the start of the war, since what he calls the start of the special military operation. Our adversary, he says, Ukraine, is shelling peaceful civilian towns. Now again, there's very little evidence that this is the case. In fact, there is more evidence that Russian stockpiles have gone wrong and exploded. Russia is, after all, using extremely old and poorly sourced weapons, which are unstable. But, this does develop a narrative that Russia is trying to project, that Ukraine wants to move the conflict into Russian territory, that Ukraine and NATO are both threatening Russia's sovereignty. It's a worrying development in the propaganda campaign, and as I say, unless the West wishes to or is prepared to counter this propaganda war, we will lose this war. I think the propaganda war is the more important campaign, even than giving tanks to Zelensky. Our objective here is simply to support a nation that has been invaded by another nation. Our objective is not to crucify or attack that other nation, Russia. Our objective is simply to contain the conflict and to push the invading nation back to its own territory. That is it. I think in order to come to peaceful terms, it is probable that Mr. Putin and his cronies will have to step aside, but that is another matter.